educated, well-mannered, he seemed the perfect son.
He was the ideal son, and I think that's probably what shocked most people.
But Brian Blackwell committed the most shocking crime. It was such an unusual case because he had a double killing in a leafy, quiet suburb where nothing unusual happened. His parents doted on him.
And they cared for him deeply, and one might perhaps say perhaps too deeply.
But he killed them both and left their bodies to rot.
You would expect to meet a monster, perhaps. And that's the impression that the media by and large want to make of him. Brian isn't like that.
Tonight, my child, my killer, the extraordinary case of Brian Blackwell, on the making of a monster. As a forensic psychologist, I work with people and not monsters. I've spent the last 10 years analysing the behaviour of murderers, rapists and paedophiles. I've worked in secure units and prisons, trying to understand what is it that makes them be capable of a terrible act of violence. Tonight's story is not about an icon of evil, but rather an 18-year-old boy, a promising student, and to all appearances, an ideal son. But this ideal son was to kill his parents with a claw hammer and a knife.
To try to unravel the psychological profiles of dangerous convicts, Kerry has spent a decade researching and interviewing the most violent killers and criminals in Britain. Tonight, she examines the case of the 18-year-old boy who killed his parents with a kitchen knife and a claw hammer.
Well, it is a fascinating case, and here to discuss it are Dr. David Holmes, a fellow forensic psychologist and expert in offender profiling, and Mark Williams-Thomas, a former detective and one of the country's top criminal analysts. But first, let's find out more about the crime. Liverpool has had its fair share of tragedy over the years, but the killing of Brian and Jacqueline Blackwell was something unique. For one thing, it happened far away from the city centre in the sleepy suburb of Melling. Melling's a very quiet place on the outskirts of Liverpool in the north. It's typical suburbia, leafy, full of bungalows, detached houses, and a really quiet area.
People may be familiar with the Melling Road that runs across the Aintree Racecourse, and it's a rural, quiet area, and not the sort of place that one associates with major crime.
But when neighbours reported a disturbing smell from the Blackwell's bungalow at 11 Sandy Lane, officers stumbled on a horrific scene.
Well, the scene that confronted the officers who were called to the house was of the Blackwell, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell, in there, both of them dead. And everywhere in the house was full of insects, flies, millions of them.
And the bodies had been in place, we later found out, around about 5 to 6 weeks in the summer in a closed house, and so the bodies were both in a very advanced state of decomposition.
Mr. Blackwell was slumped in a chair. It appeared as though he'd just been sitting when he'd been attacked and hadn't moved. Mrs. Black was somewhat different. There were signs there that she had been attacked in one part of the house, probably in the same room, and then dragged through to the bathroom. And there she'd been put in the bath.
The Blackwells had one son, 18-year-old Brian Jr. Police traced him to his girlfriend's house, where they broke the news.
His initial reaction was clearly one of shock. He seemed stunned. He then insisted that we were wrong and that they, in actual fact, were in Spain on holiday, and that he knew that they wouldn't be returning until a few days afterwards, and they had a holiday home in Spain. And then he became understandably distraught and upset. And then came out with, to me, a very bizarre comment that he looked at the officers and asked them, is prison cold?
When Brian was taken in for questioning, at first he protested his innocence. But when police found the hammer that he'd hidden in his girlfriend's garage, Brian broke down.
They got to a violent stage in the arguments with my dad, where I obviously felt under pressure enough to push back, and I struck him with the soft side of the hammer.
Brian's father had over 30 stab wounds, his mother over 20. Both had been bludgeoned with a claw hammer. So what kind of son could do this to his parents? That is where our puzzle begins.
When I first met Brian, having read a little bit about the facts of the case, you might have expected to meet a serial killer more akin to Hannibal Lecter. When you actually meet him, nothing could be further from the truth. He's more akin to Harry Potter than to Hannibal Lecter, because we had a
an 18-year-old model student who'd done exceedingly well for himself at his studies.
Brian was a son that I think any parent would admire. He was polite, articulate, extremely bright, hard-working, and I think that increased the shock to family and friends that this had taken place.
But it wasn't simply the killing that was shocking, it was what Brian did next.
Well, after the killings, his behaviour was really quite extraordinary and really chilling. Because most people, after they've killed somebody, especially their parents, would go to pieces. Their life comes apart, basically. Not with him.
What shocks a lot of people when they first come to the case and hear about it is what happens in the immediate aftermath of the death of Brian's parents. He takes a taxi, he goes to his girlfriend's house in the south of Liverpool, and the next day they depart for a holiday in the States.
With his unsuspecting girlfriend by his side, Brian enjoyed the holiday of a lifetime, leaving a paper trail of extravagance and apparently carefree behaviour. He committed this horrific killing and then acted as if nothing had happened. He went off to New York on holiday, they stayed at the presidential suite at the Plaza, they went to Barbados.
They went on to California, to Miami, where he spent over £30,000.
They had like the trip of a lifetime, and nobody knew what had happened back here in Merseyside. No one had any idea of that. After 2 weeks abroad, Brian returned to Melling, and to his surprise,
I think that Brian expected the bodies of his parents to have been discovered whilst he was in America. And I think that when he came back from America and went straight to the house and realised that there was no police activity, no cordoning off of the scene, and that the house was very much as he left it, that the bodies hadn't been discovered. And I think that he didn't really have a second plan.
He told people that he lost the keys, he couldn't get in, and that his parents were away on holiday, still in Spain. He went to the house, and there's certainly evidence that he went into the house, seemed to have ignored the bodies of his parents lying there, and actually picked up the mail. He picked up the hammer with which he'd bludgeoned them, and took that to his girlfriend's house.
when police found the hammer, they cracked the case, and Brian Blackwell confessed.
I just remember that line of his teeth. And there was some blood coming up. My mum said, "What did you do, Blue?"
So Mark, why do you think that it captured the public's imagination, this case?
Of course, a case where a child kills their parents is very, very rare. It received massive media attention, because it received massive media attention, obviously everyone was aware of it. And of course, what people can do is they can associate with it. They can associate, is it my child? Is my child capable of killing us? And of course, that's the question. How do you know whether they are?
If we think about the crime scene, what greeted the detectives when they first stumbled upon the house in Sandy Lane? What do you think that tells us about the relationship between Brian and his parents, Mark?
Well, clearly Brian got to a position and a stage in his life where he felt he needed to kill his parents. Why he got to that stage, we really don't know. The way that he killed his parents, of course, was only very personal, but it was also very barbaric. You know, to take to your father and to your mother a hammer, and with a knife, not just once, but strike them a numerous amount of times, and insert a knife into them numerous amount of times, tends to suggest that he was in a position of complete and utter rage.
I would say either enraged or someone who does not have the restraints that normal people may have in these circumstances. Clearly for the police, you know, you're not looking for the average burglar in this particular case. You're looking for someone who would sustain an attack, would not actually feel. I mean, most of us will go up to the precipice and think, oh yes, I could hurt someone, I could really hurt them, I really hate them. But when it comes to actually landing a blow, seeing the blood and ripping at flesh and bone, you actually feel a sense of revulsion which holds you back.
It's interesting to me, though, the difference in the positioning of the parents' bodies. So you've got father who's been positioned after death in actually quite a peaceful state. He's sitting with his hands in his lap, he's got his glasses positioned in his hand, whereas mum's been dragged very unceremoniously, you know, knocking her head on skirting board by the feet into the bathroom. Now, what does that tell us?
We can quite reasonably speculate that most of Brian's venom, anger, hatred, call it what you will, was directed at the mother and not at the father. This is not someone who has just wanted to kill someone and that's it. This has gone way over the top. This, particularly in the case of the mother, seems to show real vengeance, real kind of focus on one person. The father, needless to say, had many, many blows, but was left kind of in a peaceful position. But the mother, you know, had been dragged by the feet, which takes an immense effort. And why? And why has she been stabbed so many times? And why has she been hit so many times? This is not an average homicide.
Now, what's really shocking about this crime is how Brian acted after he'd killed his parents. So here he is, he's killed the two most important people, the most central figures in his world. He's washed the blood off him, he's changed his clothes.
I'm not sure he thought they were the most important people in his life.
They had to be. They were the most central figures, whether they were important.
Yes, they were certainly the most central, whether they were the most important people in his life.
Yeah, that's a good point. But even so, you've killed your parents, and you go off on holiday and have a fantastic time. How is that possible?
People would say that, you know, somebody dissociates from the crime and is able to just walk away, separate out the memory. I don't actually subscribe to that kind of view. I don't think the idea that he dissociated quite simply and separated off the two incidents in his mind because he could not cope with it.
It was too traumatic for him to
I don't think it was that traumatic for him. I don't think so. He would not have gone through that incident the way he did. If he felt trauma, he would have stopped, he would have ceased. There's something called the orbitofrontal cortex, which in his case I would have said was probably damaged because he felt no revulsion during the act and felt no remorse and no feelings afterwards. I would have said that he was an insensitive, callous character, not someone who dissociated.
Any remorse afterwards. What we do know is that he went on a holiday. What we do know is he was able to disassociate himself. He was able to compartmentalize what had happened at home.
in a very, very short space of time.
So what we do know is that. Whether or not why he did that, well, we don't know. Whether or not the background to it was more. But what we do know very clearly is he disassociated himself. He was compartmentalising what had happened at home in order that he could go on holiday and forget everything that happened.
Well, clearly we need to find out a lot more about Brian's background if we're going to understand what really went on that night. In July 2004, Brian Blackwell killed his elderly parents in the home that they shared in Melling on Merseyside. And then he jetted off on holiday with his unsuspecting girlfriend. What kind of person can commit an offence like this and then act as if nothing had happened? What do we know about Brian Blackwell's upbringing? If Melling is a quiet village, then the Blackwells were quieter than most. If ever a family kept themselves to themselves, then it seems that the Blackwells were it.
I used to cut the hedge, you know, in the summer, and I'd be outside cutting the hedge, and they'd be in the garden, and I'd go over and start talking to them, you know. But apart from that, I didn't go really to the house. They never invited me to the house.
Brian's parents retired and lived a sort of quiet sort of lifestyle. His father was an ex-accountant, his mother was an ex-antique dealer, and they doted on their son. I truly believe that.
Brian's parents wanted the best from him. I don't think there can be any dispute about that. Where there might be some dispute is how they went about achieving that aim.
Brian had a secure, if sometimes solitary, childhood.
Yeah, he was in the garden. He never mixed with anybody. He played football on his own. He never had any friends in there, any lads playing with. She always kept him in there all the time and never mixed with anybody around. There's kids around here, but he never mixed with them at all.
He came to them much older in life. They'd both been married previously. He was the only child of that marriage, and mother was over 40 and father over 50 at the time they were married.
There may have been more to that generational gap than appears at first blush. They were quite controlling about what Brian did, about who he saw, about the clothes that he wore and how he'd socialised. So they were very influential on the whole of his life.
At 13, Brian delighted his mum by winning a scholarship to the £7,000 a year Liverpool College. Brian fit in perfectly at that school. He was academically gifted. He was particularly good at scientific subjects, but he was also good at Spanish as well. And his parents told everyone that he was not just going to be a doctor, but a surgeon.
At the school, particularly in the science, she would go to open evenings with all the past reports to compare them with the current ones, and she would overrun her time, keep everybody waiting while she went through her son's progress in very precise detail.
Brian was also a keen tennis player, but it was here that the first signs appeared that all was not well.
Brian's main interests were principally tennis, and he'd play at a local club in Liverpool. Brian was an able tennis player, but he went a little further than that.
He claimed to be on the professional circuit. He claimed to have a contract for £45,000 a year to play tennis and sponsorship with Nike, all of which was just complete fantasy.
By this point, Brian had a girlfriend. Amal Sabah was 18 years old, and meeting her was a turning point. The fantasy life that Brian had concocted was about to spiral out of control.
Brian's behaviour became, I think, started to show signs of being irrational probably around about February. It seemed to coincide with the relationship that he'd had with his girlfriend becoming a little bit more serious.
He was very keen on impressing his girlfriend, who was, by all accounts, his first girlfriend, and he showered her with gifts and made lavish gestures. He took £9,000 out of a fund that had been set up for his university education to buy her a car. These enormous gestures showing himself to be much richer, much better placed, and much more successful than was in fact the case.
He first of all produced some tennis rankings from a tennis magazine, which he doctored and amended to put himself at number one of these rankings, which he showed to his girlfriend. He would look at Mercedes cars, which were £50,000-60,000, and go for test drives, and then he hadn't even passed his driving test at this point.
Lying about his income, Brian applied for credit cards. He went for loans at city centre banks, claiming he was playing in the French Open. But all the time, he romanced his girlfriend Amal with presents and gifts.
He wrote her a cheque for £39,000, when in fact there was 9 pence in his account.
Brian had promised his girlfriend a holiday to the States, but his parents had discovered his spending. The fantasy bubble that he lived in was about to burst, and with devastating consequences. I think there's clear evidence that Brian's parents were pushy, but do you think that he went further than that? Brian has suggested that in actual fact they tried to keep him in very much a childlike state. Do you think that it amounted to abuse, David?
I think, certainly, with absolute certainty, there was psychological abuse. Brian was clearly, I mean, from an external observation, infantilised by his mother. He was kept, as it were, a small child. He was treated as a small child.
I think that it was said that actually his mum insisted on feeding him from a bottle up to the age of 10.
And there were other suggestions by him that, that he was bathed at the age of 17. But I think we've got to be careful to bear in mind, Brian is a liar. He's been shown to be a liar throughout the whole of this case. So therefore, been seen by other people who make the same comment as external observers to say, no, he wasn't really allowed to mix with people. He was very restricted. Whatever he did went by and through his mother for approval.
There's certain things we will never be able to verify. For example, Brian has said that his mum sold his bike, just inexplicably sold his bike one day, and that's because he was using that bike to actually cycle out to visit friends. So we're never going to really understand the extent of what was going on behind closed doors, but it does seem...
And I'm not sure necessarily we need to always look what's going on behind closed door. Let's look about what else was going on within his life and his community, what was going on at school, how was he perceived at school, what was his relationship like with his peers, and indeed his girlfriend. Actually, his girlfriend bought into this whole life that Brian was leading and actually encouraged him to behave in the way that he did. What we must remember, of course, is that she had no knowledge about him having killed his parents, and particularly when she went away on holiday with him, she just went away on a fantastic holiday, not knowing what secret lay at home.
Yeah, perhaps her naivety there encouraged him and really spurred him on, and maybe took him to the point.
Naivety to a degree, but indeed, she may well have been in love with him. She may well have been really attached to him, and in fact, plenty of people have bought into his fantasy anyway. You went to the bank manager, you spoke to a lot of people who went to the car showroom people.
Why do you think that somebody would concoct a fantasy life for themselves? Is it not indicative that there's actually something very, very seriously wrong with reality?
I know. That clearly isn't correct, because there's an incredible amount of people out there in this world who live in a fantasy on a day-to-day basis, live in another world. That doesn't mean to go and they go and kill their parents.
In this case, obviously, there was more to it than that. There was a lot of repression with Brian, and I think you've got to look at how that would affect the way that he dealt with the world and the way that he conceived of the world. And this, I think, could be put into the kind of aggressive dependency, where you are made dependent by a parent, and that causes resentment. I resent being dependent, and that can create a lot of anger and a lot of revenge.
Well, it's an uncomfortable question, particularly we've got two people here who are dead, they can't answer for themselves, but do you think that they had some role and responsibility in actually creating...
Oh, absolutely. They could have put a stop to this a lot earlier on. They would have been aware of his fantasies. They were aware that he was doing an awful lot of things, claiming to be a lot of things. They had the opportunity to stop that at a very early stage. I'm not saying that had they done, he wouldn't have killed them, but clearly they could have had more of an impact.
Had they been more aware of, as parents, then their relationship with him would have been more healthy, and as a result of that, Brian would have been a more healthy individual.
I think it's clear that he was made somewhat unhealthy by the way he was treated, particularly by his mother, who was incredibly controlling of him. And also, you must kind of realise that within families, it's not just the dynamic which can cause problems in the child, it can be the genetics, and you have to face the fact that if perhaps there was something slightly awry with Brian in terms of his ability to deal with the world and feel for others, that trait may have been present in one or other of his parents, in which case, in this case, it could be the mother.
Nature or nurture, and I'm not sure that necessarily that the way that people in nature and they're brought up has absolutely anything to do with this. I think it's very much about society, it's the environment, and it's the way people are nurtured.
Nowadays we actually do have evidence which says quite categorically that in fact nature provides more of a motivation or explanation than nurture.
I think that to understand this offence, we really have to look at the microcosm that was the Blackwell family, and I think we're going to find out just to what extent things would go really tragically wrong. Tonight we're examining the case of Brian Blackwell, the 18-year-old A-level student who killed both parents at their home in Merseyside. Killing a parent is rare, but it isn't unique. There have been a number of high-profile cases. What, if anything, do these cases have in common, and what could possibly trigger a crime of this nature? One of the most famous cases happened in Los Angeles, where brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez shot dead their mother and father at their Beverly Hills home. When the brothers' lavish spending attracted suspicion, the resulting trial made headlines across America.
I went around and shot my mom. I just walked into the room. I just started firing.
The brothers claimed they'd been subject to years of abuse, but the jury didn't believe them and they were sentenced to life without parole. But there are cases much closer to home. In 1987, the holiday island of Jersey was the scene of a brutal double murder.
Another case where both parents were murdered was the case of Roderick Newell. Him and his brother were brought up in a very privileged middle-class background. They went to a good public school to Radley, and Roderick himself then went on to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst and was commissioned from there into the Royal Green Jackets Regiment. All this came to a tragic end one night after dinner at their home in Jersey, where both parents were beaten to death with a rice flail, a martial arts implement, and were then buried in a remote part of the island by Roderick and his brother. The murder, he wasn't brought to justice for some 5 years, and that was in rather dramatic form. After the yacht he was on was pursued, and he was arrested by a Royal Navy frigate and taken back to Gibraltar, whence he was extradited to Jersey to stand his trial.
But perhaps the most famous case happened at White House Farm, in a quiet village in Essex, where Jeremy Bamber shot dead his parents, Neville and June, his 6-year-old nephews, Daniel and Nicholas, and his sister Sheila Cassell, before raising the alarm himself.
He telephoned the police to say that he had a telephone call from his father saying that his sister had gone berserk with a gun and was shooting everybody, and then he dropped the phone and that was it.
Sheila Cassell was known as Bambi, a beautiful model with a history of mental illness. At the funeral, the assumption was that she had killed the family.
I tried to interview a middle-aged lady as she walked across the road after the funeral, and she just burst into tears and said simply, there is no way in a million years that Bambi did what they said she did.
But in the weeks following, attention began to focus on Jeremy Bamber himself.
His behaviour afterwards certainly attracted attention to him, because he then started spending money. I think he got advances on money that he expected. His girlfriend became suspicious of him, because although she was seen comforting him at the funerals before he became a suspect and the rest of it, but then she recalled and told the police he'd been talking about the possibility of killing his parents.
I had a phone call from a contact saying that the police had changed their whole thinking about the case, and they now considered that Jeremy was number one suspect.
Tests showed that Sheila Cassell couldn't have fired the murder weapon. A jury decided that it was Bamber who pulled the trigger to get his hands on his £500,000 inheritance. Bamber is currently serving a 25-year sentence, though to this day he continues to protest his innocence. The cases come from around the world, but what, if anything, do they have in common?
In each of the cases, it's a middle-class thing. The murderer, the killer, has been well-educated, is intelligent, has wanted for nothing, and the motive for the killing seems to be when they don't get their own way. But if we look at Blackwell, there he was, he wanted to go and live this life of fiction, if you like, as a successful tennis player, to impress his girlfriend. He needed to get money that his parents had put aside for his education, etc., and get out of their control to have his way there.
Over the last weekend of his parents' lives, Brian Blackwell was facing exposure. He promised his girlfriend a trip to America, and he'd spent over £5,000 on tickets for them both on his father's credit card. But his parents were onto him.
Brian had reached the point where he had probably two options open to him. One was confess the falsehood of the lifestyle that he said he'd had, or the other was to continue this charade, backed financially. But the obstacles of that, of course, were his mother and father.
Up until this point, everything that Brian had done or said, to some degree, hadn't been exposed. What happened on the night of his parents' demise, it seems, is that they stop him, or they challenge him about going to the States, and they prevent him from doing so.
And I think at some stage during the course of that period that he came to a decision that something that was in his way had to no longer be in his way.
David, parenticide is so rare. We have 30 cases a year on average. It's actually not very many at all. Can we draw any sort of parallels between cases?
Well, it becomes difficult, and that's why you get such strange cases lumped together, and they're doing comparisons with some, such as the Bamber, which is really familicide, where you're killing the entire family, and the Parricide, as with the Blackwell case, where it's both parents. So they look as though they're different scenarios, slightly different cases, and possibly different motivations with some commonality. It's because these are very, very rare cases indeed, and that's all you've got to compare.
There do seem to be actually very few similarities between the case of Brian Blackwell and Jeremy Bamber. The methods used in the Bamber case were a million miles away from Brian.
Well, they were different to a certain degree. This is where we try and compare cases of which we can't, because they do differ. What, of course, is that Brian's parents died with a hammer and with a knife, a very personal attack, whereas Bamber's victims died with a gunshot wound, which is far less personal. And indeed, it may well be that he committed those offences because he wanted to look like somebody else had committed the offences, whereby in relation to Brian, he was wanting to do it in relation to a revenge.
So, what do you make of motive, the concept of motive? Should we be looking for a commonality of motive between these guys who have killed parents?
No, the motive is the least important aspect. We can look at the motive once we've identified who the killer is. But what tends to happen is an awful lot of people start to concentrate on this motive as being the important starting point.
Well, that's us, isn't it? As human beings, we need to know why.
Well, it depends what area you come from. There's a lot of psychologists, a lot of people around that will say that motivation is a drive and is a key element. I disagree. I completely disagree. It's about access and opportunity that creates that person and puts that person in that position. And then once we've established who the offender is, yes, we can look at motivation, but people's motivation is all different. I dealt with a guy who killed his girlfriend. Came back from the pub, he stabbed her in excess of 20 times. Why? Because she hadn't cleaned the window. Would we have known that? He admitted it, but we still don't know whether that's entirely true. In relation to Brian, we don't know anything that he says is true.
From psychologists, though, you have to sort of realise that you may have very clear circumstantial reasons why something might happen. A trigger, a small trigger. It may be a profit motive, but then again, you have to sort of realise who would have the overriding potential to actually commit a heinous act. And needless to say, we all have little triggers, but we don't go and kill on them. Only some people will go forward and kill.
But we are all capable of killing.
We are all capable of killing. Do you really believe that?
Absolutely.
I think you'll find that when you've actually put troops into the field, and we do find this over and over again, no matter how much you train them, some people cannot kill. Some people just cannot do it. The fear and the revulsion and the sense of horror of actually ending someone's life prevents many, many people from going, and many people are actually thrown out of armies because they cannot do this.
What I'm interested in is, would Brian find it very difficult to be challenged? Because it would appear that he was challenged on that night about his holiday. His parents were onto him, they're onto his spending. Would he find that very, very difficult to accept?
We find it exceedingly difficult to accept. Basically, Brian has actually brought himself into a kind of brick wall situation. He has actually created this identity, and that is also being threatened. It's not just simply to get from A to B, he has to kind of confront his parents. In order to get from A to B, he's also going to lose that identity that he has carefully created over a number of years, and that threatens, if you like, his entire social existence.
Well, I think that to answer that question, we need to go and take a much closer look at the events of the night if we're really to understand what it was that made him do it. When you look at the stark facts of the case, the killing of Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell could easily be a clear-cut case of murder. Brian had a motive. He was calm after the event, and even went so far as trying to cover his tracks. But Brian was not convicted of murder, and in fact, the case never even went to jury. The trial of Brian Blackwell in Liverpool in September 2005 made the front pages in Liverpool and beyond. There was a huge media interest when this was listed for trial at Liverpool Crown Court. It was such an unusual case because you had a double killing in a leafy, quiet suburb where nothing unusual happened, and actually carried out by the son. So it was really unusual, and the court was packed to the rafters. It seemed an open and shut case, not just the killing of his parents, but the way he behaved afterwards.
What happened? He went on holiday. He went and picked his girlfriend up, they drove to the airport, and they set off on a luxury holiday to the United States.
Then there was his behaviour on his return, when he went back into the house where his parents' bodies lay rotting.
The actual scene itself was appalling, even for sort of experienced people. And yet he managed to avert his eyes, walk past the bodies of his parents, recover something from his bedroom, come out of the house and lock it up again. Now, I mean, that was quite incredible, I thought. And maybe an indication of how he was able to divorce himself from the events that had taken place.
It was Brian's bizarre behaviour that led to one final and dramatic twist in the tale.
This wasn't a normal crime by any stretch of the imagination. Here's a young man with no previous convictions, no trouble with the police at all. Add that to the unusual circumstances of his parents' deaths and his actions afterwards, it became apparent that it was a case worthy of psychological investigation, and that's when the experts come in, a psychiatrist and a psychologist. They examined Brian and concluded that he had narcissistic personality disorder.
Narcissistic personality disorder is a relatively rare condition. Psychiatrists say that it has 9 key characteristics, and quite uniquely, Brian had every one of them. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is classified as a disorder and not a mental illness. Sufferers typically have a grandiose sense of importance. They lack empathy with others. They're preoccupied with fantasies of power, success, and brilliance.
They also think they're entitled to be almost worshipped. And anybody who challenges them, challenges their beliefs, or in any way tries to suggest that they're not as successful as they make out, can become subject to rages, if not indeed violence.
Here at last was an explanation for Brian's bizarre behaviour, and perhaps for the killing itself. Challenged by his parents over his spending and his trip to America, had Brian exploded in a fit of rage.
The narcissist has a sense of self-entitlement, has a sense that things must be right for him, and the people who a narcissist might most expect to deliver for him are his parents. When they disappointed him and let him down so badly over this one, perhaps minor incident, but not minor to him, he goes into narcissistic rage that kills them.
Brian sat in the dock as the plea of manslaughter was accepted, and the evidence of his personality disorder was read to the court. Amal Sabo was in court, and I think she was there to see for herself what he'd actually done. But he cut a pretty pathetic figure in the dock on that day. He was slumped, crying, wiping tears away. Brian's barrister read out a statement to the court. Every moment of every day, I wish I could turn back the hands of time. I eternally long to be a little boy again, at a time when everyone really loved each other. The guilt will punish and haunt me for the rest of my life. It seemed like a genuine expression of remorse. Add to that Brian's model behaviour in prison so far. And what are the chances of rehabilitation or release?
But it seems to me that a fundamental part of this disorder is the ability to influence and dupe people and concoct a personality or a place in society that actually, in fact, you haven't got. So I think that will need a serious, long, hard look at the eligibility for him to be released.
Only the naive would call Brian Blackwell a monster, because the naive would believe this was a premeditated crime in which he wants to kill his parents. Brian isn't a murderer. He's convicted of manslaughter, and he was convicted of manslaughter because he was suffering from a personality disorder. I see no reason why, in the fullness of time, he can't or shouldn't be released into society.
Some people would think that Brian got away with murder. What would you say to that?
Well, many of the police officers in the case would agree with your statement, Kerry, because the use of some exotic disorder and...
Is it exotic? That's a well-established psychiatric diagnosis. It hasn't been plucked from some random textbook. This is a not a commonly diagnosed
I would say that
condition.
it had been plucked from some textbook. It is one of the rarest disorders in the
It might
personality
be
disorder.
rarely diagnosed, because let's face it, who comes to a doctor and says, excuse me doctor, I need help because I'm grandiose?
No
and
one.
No
No one
exactly.
ever comes forward to present themselves as having a personality disorder. It is almost always the observation of their behaviour which creates this
Yeah,
scenario.
but we're talking about something that is actually in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That is the common textbook that we use to diagnose mental disorders. So it's not being plucked.
But it is also
it's not exotic.
it's also a textbook that can be used by sort of defence counsel to find an excuse. One kind of crooked molecule that explains every crooked event, if you like. Therefore, everyone gets off on mitigation. We cannot have the situation.
The problem is, the point that you two are making is exactly the point that is picked up on, is that you're trying to shoehorn somebody into a position. You're trying to explain away a pattern of behaviour, which could be quite simple. This person, and we know that people are very complex in nature, and we're trying to label him in the specific area and say that pattern, that personality disorder, that mental illness explains away why.
It's a meaningless label. It's not an explanation in your view.
No, I'm not saying it's a meaningless label. What I'm saying is that we're too keen from psychologists, psychiatrists to actually label someone and say that is the reason they committed the offence.
Mark, don't you think that a label of narcissistic personality disorder actually goes a long way to explaining Brian's behaviour after the offence, his fantasy life, and the whole way he threw himself into the trip into America?
Absolutely, it does. If we want to, of course, label him, and that is where the problem arises. We try and label people, we try and put people into boxes, and we try and say this is why they behave like they did. His pattern of behaviour was erratic, it was irresponsible, and there were so many elements about his behaviour, and quite simply, to label him as being narcissistic is to look at it in too far to a simplistic way.
Brian was shown to have all 9 key characteristics of a narcissistic personality disorder. Would you agree with that
And the problem
diagnosis?
contest it. I would quite simply contest it.
How?
Basically, he also conforms very closely and perhaps more precisely with the manipulative behaviour of someone who is psychopathic. Brian's narcissistic tendencies. And if this is a narcissistic personality disorder, it has to be pervasive, it has to be permanent. And this behaviour seems to come and go, and he certainly can switch it on and off, which is not the case usually with someone with personality disorder.
The problem you have, though, is you have a situation where personality disorder apparently is untreatable, therefore drugs can't be used. We have a mental illness, which we can say we can treat with drugs. We have a position where this person has gone to court, gone to prison, and now he is in prison with a personality disorder which is untreatable. Therefore, if he ever comes out into the community, he's going to still have his personality disorder. It begs the question for me, does he not have a mental illness, which is the reason why he committed his offences, therefore he can be treated, otherwise he's in prison for the rest of his life?
David, isn't it the case, though, that recently psychologists are making some inroads in treating personality disorders?
Well, it is the case, yes. There have been great inroads using cognitive behavioural therapy of breaking down all those ideas and those fixed and rigid ideas that people with personality disorders have. But, in a way, when you present yourself as having a personality disorder in a courtroom, you are actually putting yourself in a greater cage than if you quite simply admit guilt.
Let's be clear what a narcissistic personality disorder involves. It involves a lot of traits that sit around people who are not only leaders of business, leaders of industry, and indeed will sit across a lot of very high-profile, successful people. And I'm sure that many of those people probably have 9 of those character traits that have been identified with Brian.
But to think that anybody who was diagnosed as having a disorder would be along a continuum somewhere. Now, Brian was quite far along that continuum. The fact is that 5 experts were instructed, and they all came to the same conclusion. It seemed clear to them that Brian was a narcissist.
I find it absolutely fantastic that 5 psychiatrists can agree on the rarest personality disorder diagnosis and also the most misdiagnosed personality disorder that exists.
But the fact that there was a consensus here between 5 experts, 5 eminent psychologists and psychiatrists, does that not mean that there's actually
We
something
cannot discredit the experts that are given these views, and indeed I'm sure that Brian has a narcissistic personality disorder. The question is here, is whether with that narcissistic personality disorder he should have been convicted of manslaughter, or whether or not he should have been before a jury who were enabled to decide whether that narcissistic personality disorder was the cause of him committing the offence, or whether or not he committed murder.
Well, other people have tried to use narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder as a defence. Dennis Nielsen, serial killer, he attempted to use it as a defence. Now, clearly, 17 or so murders are not committed in a narcissistic rage. But could it be that these killings were? We've already said that the attacks were frenzied, they were enraged. So is there not a direct link between Brian's condition, not a mental illness, but his condition, and his level of impulse control, that he was enraged by having his narcissistic bubble?
Well, the problem is we go back to this situation with having a personality disorder enables you to get to not be convicted of a murder, whereas it should be labelled. If he had this personality disorder, which took him to the degree that he killed his parents, then he is mentally ill.
Do you think that the judge was blinded by science?
I think very much this is was the first time that this had really been used in court successfully. Narcissistic personality disorder has been used in America. I don't think a courtroom would understand this disorder fully. They take the word from the experts, from the defence counsel, and they accept that because you're bamboozling a British court with science, with something they have no experience with. And I think that's why it was used. And I personally think that Brian should have been charged with murder.
Mark, do you believe that justice was done in this case?
Clearly it was. Brian was in prison. He's been put into prison in relation to killing his parents. Whether he was convicted in relation to a manslaughter or whether he was convicted in relation to a murder, the end result is the same place. What it does do is it sets the precedent for moving forward as to whether or not other people will be able to use a narcissistic personality disorder in order to get a conviction for manslaughter rather than murder. And I think that the professionals that raise this issue have got to go and do an awful lot of work to show that someone that suffers a personality disorder isn't someone who's suffering a mental illness.
A mental illness, you have even less responsibility. With a personality disorder, you have some responsibility, but not as much as somebody who does not have that disorder.
So the simple answer is we need to stop looking at this so complicated. We need to stop trying to deconstruct it. And what we need to say is a human mind is a very complex thing, and we will never understand it.
Well, on that rather pessimistic note, let me just say, Mark, David, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.